All right, so this is a modded GameCube that is on my store, retroremaster.com. Might sell by the time you see this, probably, but there's always colors coming in and out. Anyways, it's having a little trouble reading discs. Yeah, it just doesn't want to read disc. It goes directly to this page right here. So what we're going to do to fix this is we are going to take this apart and put in some new capacitors. This GameCube does read some games. I'll put some footage on screen here, but I did already try and adjust the potentiometer on this. It got it to read some discs, but I was having trouble with Animal Crossing, and now I'm having trouble with Mario Kart. And these are my games. They're known good discs. They are from my childhood, and there are some scratches, but it should work nonetheless. So I'm going to put this off to the side. We're going to tear this apart. I'm not going to really go over that. I'll do a time lapse for those who really need it. It's pretty straightforward, and we'll get to soldering these. I will say that there are 4 game bit screws here. It's the bigger of the 2 sizes of game bit. Other than that, you just need a couple of sizes of Phillips heads. They'll work just fine. Now that we have our shielding off, we can put that off to the side for now. We can unplug this cable here, just pull it out. We can lift this latch up here. It pushes that way. Then we can pull that ribbon cable out. That is for our laser. Be very careful. And then I believe this is also for the laser. This one doesn't have a latch. You can just pull this out. Be very careful not to puncture it. You also want to try not to crease it like I just did. And we are going to be soldering here. If you didn't get that and we're replacing capacitors, I feel like I didn't need to explain that part. But I'm going to heat up my soldering iron. We're going to remove these 2 wires here. Don't worry about it too much. It literally says red and brown on the board to tell you which wire goes where. If you end up forgetting, it's fine. We can put the soldering iron down for now, and we can take care of the rest of these screws, because unfortunately we're going to need to get on the other side of this board. And there are also some handy dandy little prints on the board telling you where the screws go. So again, if you forget, don't worry about it. Nintendo is actually thoughtful for once. There are only 4 screws here, and they all have tiny little washers, so don't lose those. And that's that potentiometer I was telling you about. We'll go over that later though. For now, we can just lift up on this board. It is locked in by this plastic tab over here. We can just lift up on that, and we can put pretty much everything away except for this little board here. I'm just gonna clear my space, and here is where the fun begins. I don't know which of these capacitors is for the laser. I don't know if they're all for the laser. Capacitors will just die with age. It's normal. So we're gonna replace all of them. I would be curious though, like which one is specifically the one we need, or do we actually need to remove all of them? Because like I know with the Game Boy Color, one of them's for sound, one of them's for the screen, but there's also a lot more than just 3 capacitors on this board. So we're gonna replace them all. Now, some people swear by flush cutters. They'll grab it, not necessarily just flush cut it off. They'll use it to grip on, and they twist and pull out of it. I tried that, and it is easier because desoldering these isn't the most fun, but you can still pretty easily rip a pad, even though they say, oh, you won't rip pads this way. It still happens. So I'm gonna desolder these. And in the kit that I will hopefully remember to link down below, if I forgot, just let me know. You'll get enough capacitors to replace all of them, but you obviously can't just swap any capacitor for any spot. It's fairly straightforward. You get 3 of these, you get 5 of these, you get 1 of these, and 1 of these. So I never remember which one goes where, but I do know that this one, this one, this one, and these 2 are all the same size. And since there's 5 of them all in the same size, oh my gosh, would you look at that? Same thing with these. There's 1, 2, 3 of those that are all the same size, and they're even all labeled the same. So which one would, oh, there we go. Now you got to be careful because this one looks like it could fit in with those, but it's a different voltage. This is 4 volts, or at least I assume that's what the V means. So I'm going to assume that even though this says 10 volts on it, this is the singular one that is big. this is the singular one that is big. So that leaves us with this one going here. I like to remove all of the same size ones at the same time and then put the new ones on before I go to the next size. It just makes things easier in my head. But since there's 3 of these right here, it can be a little tough to add and remove stuff right there. So I like to start with the 5 small ones. That way we can remove these 2 and re-add these 2. If you want to, you can remove this at the same time. Just remember which one needs to be replaced there. But I think from here, I'm just going to do a little time lapse because I don't really know what else I can do. I'll cut in if I think of a good tip to give you to removing a capacitor. In general, I heat up my soldering iron to about 300 degrees Celsius. I use lead-free solder, so 300 degrees Celsius is about good. If the solder isn't playing nice, you can up the temperature a little bit. I don't really go past like 375, but 350 should be plenty. And of course, I love to use flux. I will try to remember to link these down below, but I have a ton of links on my website. If you just go to retroremaster.com, you can find all of the consumables, the tools, the everything that I recommend. So I should put the capacitor set on there, but I'll just run through removing these real quick. So I like to heat up one side, wiggle it a little bit, swap to the other side, wiggle it up a little bit. You don't want to use too much force because you don't want to rip the pads off, and then just keep going back and forth. There we go. And I like to just flatten that out a little bit. We didn't rip any pads. Woohoo. And then we'll do the same for this one. And there we go. And since it's kind of in our way, I'm going to remove this one as well. Same deal, even though it's bigger. Just get a little bit of pressure, swap between both sides, heating it up, using that flux to your advantage, and boom. Now I'm going to remove the rest of the small ones, and then I'll come back to teach you how to put it on if you need that help. I'll just dump them out here. Just try not to get them mixed up with the bad ones if you still have those lying around. And I'll zoom in for this. Okay, apparently that's as far as I can zoom. So on the print on the board, there is a rectangle. It might be a little tough to see, but right here on this side and this side, there's a diagonal instead of a corner. And that'll signify that this is the side where you put the diagonal corners. Does that make sense? It's like a puzzle. Matching the puzzle and the puzzle piece together. That was probably a terrible explanation, but don't quote me on this one because I'm still fairly new to all this. I believe that the black part signifies the negative leg, and I believe that the rounded corners signifies the positive leg, but I could be completely wrong. If you do know better than me, correct me in the comments down below, please. Kindly correct me. But we can set that down. I'm just going to get this leg soldered down. Then I'm going to push down on the top of the capacitor and hopefully it'll get soldered in there. It doesn't. I'm going to add a little bit of new solder wherever my solder went because there is not much solder there. Now that side's soldered down. I'm going to add a little bit of solder to this side as well. Actually, there's plenty of solder on my tip, so I'll just put a little flux there. That adds solder to it, and we're good. Sorry, that was out of focus. Now I'm just going to time lapse through the rest of it. No matter the size of the capacitor, it's going to be about the same process. It might take you a little bit. I'm still not great at soldering down these things. I'm not even good at desoldering these things. Lifted pads will happen, so just take your time. Be careful. Try not to get too frustrated. If you do, take a step back, relax. This is not something that you want to rush if you're a beginner. I mean, you really never want to rush this thing, so enjoy the time lapse of me hopefully not failing. Oh my gosh, I think that was about 30 minutes, but we're done with that. So all of those are replaced. Again, just take your time. Flux is your friend, is going to help. One last thing is be careful where you put your soldering iron. If you're not careful, you could accidentally bridge something, whether it be one of these chips that are massively important, or maybe you accidentally remove a capacitor or resistor. I mean, if you're using hot air, that's going to be even easier to remove one of those on accident. And now that we're done, we should probably scan to make sure that we didn't bridge anything. Looking around all the places you soldered, I'm not seeing any extra solder anywhere. There's a little extra on the shielding of this, but I don't think that's going to matter. All of our legs look soldered down. I think we're all good. Not all of these spaces are going to be populated. So unless you see a loose component somewhere, the empty spot was probably meant to be there. Like this one is empty for me. Your board might be different from mine, so don't just look at my board to see if your board is good. I don't know how many revisions they did. This is B1, it looks like. Or maybe that's just a different marking entirely. I don't know. I am going to take the time to try and clean up the flux a little bit. I don't like leaving flux, even though it is no clean flux. It's sticky, it's gross. So I'm going to spray it down a little bit. I also use this Chip Quick Flux Remover, which is the same brand as my flux. And if I spray alcohol and then drop this around, it will work some voodoo magic on the flux. Absolutely love it. Not going to worry about getting it perfect, though. I'm just going to get around there a bit and hope that it is a little bit cleaner. I mean, just going over the board in general probably isn't a bad idea. Even though it is IPA, still want to make sure that it is dry before we put it all back together, because once it's all screwed in, it is not going to get much airflow. This looks okay to me, and it'll probably be fine by the time we're done putting this together. I'll also take a second to clean up the work area, and we can get this back out, put the board back down. It only goes in one way. If you're confused, just look at the ribbon cables and where we need to put everything back and put everything back. And we got to get out the soldering iron one last time, because we get to solder these two wires back down. And remember, it is labeled on the board, red on this side, brown on this side. Sure, it'll be marked differently if you have different colored wires. At least I would hope it is. That was not my best soldering, but we're good. It works. Now we should be done with the soldering iron for today. I'm going to put these screws back in. Again, don't forget the washers, and it should be marked on the board where you want to put those screws. Make sure you don't pinch the wires that we just soldered down when you screw it down. Before we get too deep, we are going to test it real quick. I'm going to leave it kind of strewn about like this. I'm not going to put the shielding on just yet, because I don't want to put 6 screws in if we have to take this apart once again. But I'm pretty confident, so I put those 4 screws in for now. I'll explain why in a second, but we can grab our disk, put that in like so. Make sure your disk drive is plugged in. Careful not to touch the fan or any of the power cables when we're testing this. And to test this, since we don't have the entire thing closed up, we are going to need to push these back here and hold it. And then this over here in the top left is our power button. We'll press that in. Do not touch the fan. Really just touch the plastic parts and you'll be fine. Pressing that down, but we're spinning. That's a good sign. So this is what it looks like if your GameCube is modded. It will initialize, it will reset, and then it'll read the disc. It does take a little bit longer to read the disc because of the Swiss menu, but it reads that we're playing Mario Kart, or at least that we have it in. You should also plug in the controller ports. I forgot to mention that. I did that quickly off camera. Sure, let's do progressive scan. I think you're supposed to do that if you have the HDMI thing in. But we are in Mario Kart. We were finally successful with this. Adjusting the laser can help, and sometimes that's all you'll need. But most of the time, you should just replace the capacitors. It'll give your GameCube's disk drive a longer life. So from here, we can take this off because we're going to need to put that shielding back on. However, if you were not successful here, like I said earlier, this is the potentiometer. You can measure with a multimeter the resistance value of this, and you're going to want it to be anywhere from 50 ohms to 600 ohms. Some people say 3 to 600, some people say 4 to 600, some people say 100 to 300. Everybody has a different idea. So I just say 50 to 600. You'll take a Phillips head screwdriver and twist this ever so gently, like barely at all. It is very sensitive. Not even like a quarter turn. A quarter turn is a huge difference to this. Just barely twist it, check the reading again. I would check it every like 50 ohms, from 50 to 600 ohms if you want to start from the top or the bottom. It's up to you. This, I believe, is at about 100 ohms on mine. Somewhere in that range, your GameCube should be reading discs again. If you want to start with that, great. But again, you should probably just replace the capacitors anyways. We'll do a little time lapse of me putting this back together. We'll test it again once it's all buttoned up, and we'll end the video. And then always lift up the lid before you put this down. If you don't, you might break that little sensor that knows when this is closed. So once you have it on, then you can close it so you can flip it over and actually screw it down. And now let's test it. And everything is still loading. All right, that's pretty much it. Let me know if you have any questions, and if you want to buy this GameCube or any other GameCubes that I sell, because this one will probably be gone by the time you watch this. They come in all sorts of colors. RetroRemaster.com.